Hello and welcome to End of Life University podcast, where we share real talk about life and death. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, and I'm so glad you've joined me here today. This is episode number 302. And in just a few moments, I'll be sharing an interview I did with Andrew Hahn, a psychologist who talks about his life-centered therapy that is really helpful for people experiencing trauma, loss, grief, and even going through the dying process. And we have quite an interesting conversation, so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. Before we go to that, I just wanted to mention to you once again that I do have a new podcast that just got started in the last couple of weeks called What Really Matters. And in this podcast, I'm sharing all of the spiritual content that I used to share from time to time during End of Life University. I'm kind of separating that out now into its own podcast, What Really Matters. So if you like the spiritual content that I share in solo episodes, you can head over there and subscribe to that podcast as well. And I will leave the links for that in the show notes for this episode at EOLUpodcast.com. Look for episode 302. You'll find all the links there that you need, not only for that, for signing up for my new podcast, but also for this episode. You'll also find all the archives of the previous 301 episodes, plus the show notes for those episodes. So again, that's EOLUpodcast.com. Before the interview, I just want to say a quick thank you to all of my supporters who've been making monthly contributions on Patreon. I really appreciate it. And I couldn't keep doing this without your help. So I thank you always from my heart for supporting the podcast. If you want to know more about that, you can go to my page at Patreon, patreon.com/EOLU. So now we'll move on to my interview with Andrew Hahn about life-centered therapy. And as always, stay tuned after the interview and I'll come back with a few takeaways and to say goodbye. So here we go. Today, I'm very happy to welcome my guest, Dr. Andrew Hahn. Andrew is a licensed clinical psychologist who completed his training at Harvard University and then went to Hahnemann University for his doctorate. Dr. Hahn writes that while his strong foundation and significant experience in traditional psychology has served his clients well, he has been untiring in his effort to better understand what's going on for people so that he could help them live more contented and healthier lives. This calling led him on a search for answers that opened him to the worlds of Buddhist and Eastern psychology, mystery trainings, and depth archetypal and spiritual psychology. In collaboration with Dr. Judiths Research, Andrew has developed life-centered therapy and now trains those who want to teach or facilitate the process. And we'll be talking all about life-centered therapy today and how it could benefit many of us. And to learn more about Dr. Hahn's work, you can go to the website LifeCenteredTherapy.com. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Karen. It's my total pleasure. And thank you for welcoming me. And I can't wait to have a lovely conversation with you about all of these things.
Yeah, I was really excited to learn more about your work when I read about your interest in blending Eastern philosophy and practices into your work. Because for myself, as a Western trained medical doctor, I have often found my training limited and lacking in many areas. So I've been on a quest myself throughout my entire career, trying to learn more about other philosophies and other practices to help me and also so that I could help my patients. So I feel like we have something in common there.
Totally. I would say exactly the same thing. So, I've always wanted to just understand everything I could about life and, use it. What I use it for now is I use it to understand life as best I can, but also to help me become free and help the people I work with become free, which I think is just the whole point, is freedom.
Exactly. And as I got involved in hospice care and end of life work, I found even more that Eastern philosophies actually talked a lot more and taught a lot more about death and dying and overcoming fear of death. And that seemed really helpful to me. And so I'm excited to get into some of these areas and talk to you. And I wrote down the first question to be, what is life-centered therapy? Not realizing that's probably a weekend-long seminar that you could teach, and not something you can sum up briefly, but if you can give us an overview, that would be great.
I'll give you an overview. There's two different kinds of overviews. I'll give you the one about freedom, and then I'll give you the one about why it's called life-centered therapy. How's that?
That sounds great. So
in terms of freeing ourselves, I can explain it very simply, like in a minute. I can explain, why I believe people suffer, what I believe healing is in terms of suffering, and how it works. I think it's very simple. I think people come for healing for only one reason. I don't care what you call it. You could call it fear of death or fear of non-existence, or you could call it, chronic fatigue, or you could call it anxiety, depression, bad relationships, alienation. I don't care what you call it. Basically, I think it's one thing. It's more than one thing, but basically one thing. If people are anxious in a way that they're reactive or judgmental. And what I think that is something couldn't be taken in stride, something couldn't be handled. So really what I think is when you can't, so I would say the trauma, that's my definition of trauma, something that can't be handled because it's too bad, it's too much, it's too good, it's too different, it's too something. But as soon as it's too something that you can't just say, I can be with it in a non-reactive way, that is what I would say trauma and suffering are, not to be able to be with what is. Okay? So what's healing? Whether you're a medical doctor or a psychologist or a shaman, it's to master and to help others master what couldn't be handled, what couldn't be taken in stride. So you can then integrate it. That's all I think healing is. It's to be able to be with what couldn't be handled and be in a different relationship with it. And I think it's very easy to say how to do that, no matter what it is. It could be the existential anxiety of non-existence. It could be anxiety around death, or it could be fear of getting in front of crowds of people, or fear of riding a bicycle. It doesn't matter. When there's something that can't be handled, by and large, some things are developmental, but we're not going to talk about that right now. But by and large, when there's something that can't be handled, in that moment, a discomfort is born. Just like Karen was born in a moment and Andy was born in a moment, something else was born in a moment. And you can know that thing as a sensation, but most of the time we don't know that. So there's a discomfort born in that moment. But because we're not aware of it, we identify with the discomfort without knowing that it's there. And then we get stuck in the moment the discomfort was born. So, like, to take a simple example, which I like, let's suppose you're in my office and a motorcycle backfires and you have a panic attack. Why are you having a panic attack? Well, let's keep it simple. 10 years ago, you were in a war. A bomb goes off near you. You can't handle it. And when you can't handle it, you're stuck there. So when the motorcycle backfires, you're not here. You're there. And in fact, whenever there's anything that can't be handled, you stop being in the present moment. And you're always not in the present moment. It may or may not reveal itself, but you'll not be able to be there. So what I'd say is, let's suppose you had that panic attack, and I say, Karen, you're having a panic attack. When you have a panic attack, what's happening in the body? And you say, my heart's pounding. Let's suppose you say that. Then I'd say, Karen, you're not having a panic attack. Your little toe is fine. Heart pounding is having a panic attack. That's its name. It's not my heart pounding. It's not a part of me any more than Karen is a part of Andy. It has its own independent existence. It's a living being whose name, until it tells us it's Karen when she's 22, and it will tell us its name, or it's Sylvia from the French Revolution, or it's a little green woman from Alpha Centauri, or it's somebody 15 lifetimes from now, or it's one of Karen's blood ancestors from 20 generations ago. It will tell us who it is. It's a living being, and it's here. And as soon as you choose to become heart pounding, then what happens is you stop from going and being unconsciously living your identity as heart is pounding to saying, I'm with you, whoever you are. I'm here. You could say, I'm holding you, or I'm the witnessing host. And that's who I truly am. And I will be with you, heart is pounding, and you're going to share your story. And as soon as you enroll yourself that way, it's like becoming an actress or an actor. One of three things happens. Either you will relive the story, but this time by choice, even if it's miserable, or you'll see it, or you'll hear it. So it's like you're going to be a character in a play, or you're going to be watching a movie, or you're going to be reading a novel. And as soon as you choose to become heart is pounding or pounding heart, you no longer say, that's who I am. You remember pounding heart. And as soon as you remember, what you've done is someone who was dismembered, right, has broken off from who you know you are, you have now remembered. And as soon as you do that and you let it share its story, and if it needs something other than just sharing its story while you're there, aligned with it, but also aligned with life, in a sense, it will tell you it needs something. And then when you take care of it, pounding heart will dissolve back into its pure form, which is energy. And then the next time the motorcycle backfires, you'll say, that is reminding me of who I was 10 years ago, but it's not, I don't identify with it anymore. It's not who I am. And when you get to a place where you don't identify with anything, you're free. Because then you just become essentially a witnessing, holding, hosting verb. And then there's no more anxiety. There's no more fear. And that's what we all aspire to, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. I love that concept and the idea that we have to embrace what is and what has happened in our life and whatever is present with us right now. And that goes back to my dissatisfaction with Western medicine too often for offering medications and drugs to people that would tend to numb or repress even further those uncomfortable feelings rather than helping people face them. And I think that's where I ran into a lot of issues with the way I was trained and the way, the conventional methods for treating these symptoms.
Well, what can I tell you? I think what you say is very valid. Even if, because I have some sense of medication, and some medications actually do some very wonderful things for your chakras, for example. So, and I don't think necessarily all medication, because everything moves energy, often because they don't, dare I say that, they don't know what they're doing, you'd have to get very lucky, right? Because it's like, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. But occasionally when you don't know what you're doing, you have to do something that happens to be useful. But what I would say is if you don't know what the problem is, you can't solve it. If you don't know that the reason the person's having a panic attack is because they were in a war and a bomb went off, and you give them medication because they're having panic attacks, even if you do something for their panic attack, and even if it does something for their field, they're still stuck. And it'll show up some other way. So I think that's what I'd say. I'd say you have to know what the cause is in order to be in a different relationship and to come to some kind of resolution. And I think all these causes are energetic and narrative.
And it makes sense. I mean, there's probably a place for everything, every kind of treatment. And as even your bio said, you found your Western training to be helpful at times for patients. You just knew there could be something more. So I guess I should be careful about not wanting to reject anything that's out there, because there's a place and time when any modality might be helpful.
Yeah, I would say everything gets to come to the table, and some things shine much more of a light of truth on things than others. And when you think you know the answer, and you're sure you know the answer, and it's a material answer, the likelihood is you don't.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I mean, I would say in terms of what we both learned in our training, there may be something useful there, but it's not the truth. It's,
Yeah.
Believe me, it's, yeah, I understand. And, I think we use medication because we don't want to face things mainly. And that will never resolve anything, even if it gives you some symptom relief.
Yeah. And can I ask you, as a practitioner, do you find you have to face what's within you in order to really help clients who come to you as well? Because I think sometimes that's one of the problems that I find with other doctors. They themselves don't want to face some of their own issues. And so that allows them to be blind somewhat to what's happening with their patients. And I don't know if you value that kind of self-care and self-wisdom.
Totally. But I would say two things. I would say it's absolutely paramount. And I'd also say if we all had to wait until we had, finished our self-care, in history, we could probably count on two hands the people who could actually do self-care, who could actually be of use to people. So I have a commitment to, like what I say to the people I work with, I'm not asking you to do anything I'm not doing. I mean, I have my own things that I'm working with, but, I think the key for us is to say, can I have an open heart? And can I be open with knowing that I don't know the answer? And then at least they can at least get as far as they can get if I can give them a framework for understanding something. If I haven't worked on something, but I can say to you, not every coach can play as well as a basketball player, but if they say, I know the framework well enough that I might be of use to you anyway, right? If I can say to you, look, there's a basic premise here. You couldn't handle something, so there's a discomfort. And if you tell me you're a little green woman from Alpha Centauri, I'll say yes. If you tell me that a dark energy took you over, I'll say yes. So I'll just be open to whatever comes through, and I'll be here present with you as best I can. I'll be engaged with you, and I'll be open-hearted with compassion. I'll be open-minded with curiosity and understanding. And I may not have gone where you've gone, but at least I won't get in the way. And then, if I've gone further than you've gone, maybe I can point you in a direction, but, saying it may have been useful, but that was just my journey, but you're going to still have to go on your own. That's, I guess, what I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That makes total sense to me. And so I was wondering, for a client, how does life-centered therapy work, and how might it differ from traditional psychotherapy when someone comes into your office?
That's simple. How it's different from traditional psychotherapy is most psychotherapy has people talk about things. I think talking about things by and large is not very useful. So what you're going to do, I mean, I gave you the simple form of what I do. You're going to come and you're going to say, I have an intention, right? Let's say the person came in and says, I have panic attacks, right? And I'm going to, the simple form of that is to say, all your panic attack is if you want to look at it from a energetic point of view, when there's something that you can't handle, what happens is energy turns into matter. So you could say in this dimensionality, the speed of light squared slows down an awful lot and becomes a dense energy. And if you think you're Karen, you're a dense energy to life. If you say, I'm Karen, I'd say, no, you're not. You're Karening. As soon as you say, I'm Karen, you are to life what the pounding heart was to you, right? So it's like you're going to have to say at some point or other, I'm going to have to be the one I identified with. And you'll always find a sensation then if you think you are Karen, right? So any identity you have is going to be a dense energy. So I would say whenever there's something that can't be handled, energy turns into matter. You can feel it in the body as a discomfort, right? Like the panic attack person. So all I'm going to do in simple form, I would say, when there's something you're suffering about, there will be an equivalent body sensation. Find the body sensation, choose to bring all your awareness to it to such degree that you become the body sensation. That's your new name. Your new name will be, in this case, pounding heart. And then you're going to say, I'm going to be receptive to you, pounding heart. You know what's going on. I don't. You're the one who's here. I'm clueless. But you're going to teach me. I'm going to be receptive to you. And in a simple form That's all it is. And if you did that over and over and over again, you would know that whenever there's something that can't be handled, that can't be taken in stride, there will be a body sensation. So you could say every dense energy is simply some story that couldn't be integrated. And it could be anything from my father yelled at me when I was 3, to my head was cut off when I was in the French Revolution, to my aunts, my great-great-grandmother was on a forced march, to the existential anxiety of non-existence. They'll all show up as a body sensation. So it's very simple. Anytime there's something you're suffering about, which simply means you're judgmental, you're comparative, or you need to understand it, you're not being with what is. So you find out the dense energy that's associated, you choose to bring your awareness there, you become the dense energy, and you say, teach me. You know the answer, I don't. So that's, and what I'd say is whenever you have a physical discomfort, it's a story. If you have a headache, I'd say if you bring instead of taking a pill, we'll go back to what you said, don't take a pill. Someone's coming here and it's like you're saying, I hate your guts, I'm going to get rid of you. Well, not very useful. If you said, okay, headache, if all you did was you said before you took the pill, let's say you were suffering a lot from pain, you say, I can't stand it. Okay, you say, but before I do that, I'm going to say, headache, I'm going to choose to bring all my attention to you. So much so that I'm just going to become you. And I'm just going to ask a question, which is, what have you come to share? And if all we did that in this country, we would become so much more whole, because we would remember literally that which we have split off, we would remember and we would become whole, which means we would heal. And when you do that, magically, one of two things happens. Either your symptom just goes away, or it's no big deal. And the day it's no big deal, you don't have a problem. So if I take what you say, right, what this is about, let's say you came in and you say, I'm totally anxious that I'm going to die, right? Well, I can't guarantee you that in this lifetime you won't die in a physical sense. But if you could sit with that anxiety enough times, eventually you sat with that sensation, its name will be, we don't know what, but we'll say it's the anxiety, my anxiety of dying, let's say. There'll be a sensation. And then you'll say, it's not who I am. It's just an experience that's being had. So I'll sit with the experience called anxiety of dying until it's shared everything it wants to share, at which point I won't have anxiety anymore. So I'll say, it's a good day to die, or whatever. It's like, I might be sad about it. I might prefer that I wasn't dying, but I'd be able to say I'm non-reactive. And that's all it is, it's very, very simple. Then the only thing you need to know is 3 things. One is, what is the real intention? Am I getting the real problem, or am I getting a symptom of something deeper, right? Mm-hmm. So the example I like to give is, like, if I use this panic attack example, right? Well, let's give you a different story with the same symptom, right? Which is, let's suppose instead, same symptom, motorcycle backfires, you have a panic attack. But this time, it wasn't that you were a soldier in a war 10 years ago. In 1918, you were a leader of soldiers, let's suppose, however you want to understand that, whether you think it's another lifetime or it's an imagination or a mythology, I don't care. But let's suppose that's it. And let's suppose you're that leader and you're not paying enough attention and you're distracted and you walk them into an ambush and you watch as bombs go off and all these men die. And you're feeling incredible guilt and like, I never want to be a leader again. And the bombs are associated with their death. And you come into me and you have 6 problems. And let's suppose you were so never wanting to be a leader again that you get shot, you shoot yourself in the foot to make sure that you never have to lead men again, okay? And you come into me and you have panic attacks. But you also have OCD. And you have this crazy thought that, like, if I don't do something, if I make any mistakes here, the world will end. You also have ADHD because you have this distractibility that you have your OCD in relationship to. You say, I know there's some relationship between my attention deficit and my obsessive compulsive disorder. Plus, You have a story where somebody mashed your foot and you've been to a doctor, a medical doctor, and they say, I understand that you have this terrible foot pain, but you shouldn't be because we fixed your foot. Why should you have foot pain? But you have chronic foot pain and nothing touches it. And let's suppose this took place wherever it took place. And whenever you walk into this place, because of course you don't know it, you suddenly have very like I don't want to be here feelings, right? So you come in to me and you have OCD, ADHD, chronic foot pain, panic attacks, and weird feelings when you walk into some place that, was reminiscent of the thing that you didn't know happened in the first place, which is that you were in some place in, France and bombs are going off, right? Let's say you can find that story, and that story is not about the sound, right? That's a symptom. The real trauma is I betrayed a trust. Now, if I could find that, which I've spent my life trying to understand what sort of these universal patterns are that are thematic, right? And if I could diagnose that, I could save you a lot of time. I could say, that panic attack you're having, it's not really what the real intention is. But we could find out that the real intention is betrayal. And when I have you drop into betrayal instead of the panic attack, let's say your throat's closing up. And I say, okay, this time you're going to be throat closing up. And then you say, oh my God, I know what's happening. And you'll either reenact it if you're kinesthetic, or you'll say, I see it, or you'll say, I just know it. And you'll play out the story of that betrayal. And if you find that story where it originated, right, and you take care of it, then all those symptoms theoretically could go away in 20 minutes. The chronic foot pain, the OCD, if that's the only reasons. Now, often these things are layered like an archeological dig. You could have one symptom, you could have 20 different reasons that like are little streams that go into that symptom. So it may take me, I had a woman who came in for a blood draw, it took a year and a half for her basically to say, I can now go and do this. And I know all kinds of ways to get anxiety out of the body. So, you can have a doorway that brings you into things. So you have to be able to know what the real intention is. You have to know where it crystallized, because everything after that is just going to be an echo. It'd be like working with the guy and he comes in and he has a panic attack because a motorcycle backfires. And I say, I know what your problem is. You don't like motorcycles. No, that's not the problem, right? It's just something that's helping you find something else. So I have to know where the thing crystallized, because everything on the line after that's just going to be an echo, and it won't be so effective if you don't know where it crystallizes. And you have to find out one more thing, which is if that original person is just sharing your story while I'm here holding you and witnessing you enough, or do you have to do something else, which could be anything from emotional freedom technique, if you know that, or EMDR, to doing some kind of forgiveness practice, which I know various ways of doing that, but often my clients know the most amazing things that person would have to do that you would never think of. Because as soon as you tune in to life, right, and you tune into life by saying, what would happen if I just tune into the part of me that just knows? And then you open to everything, even things you could never imagine. And they say, I know. Anyway.
I love that you were saying, like, you've come to recognize certain patterns that you can see for people. And yet every individual is so different and so complex, it seems. You're following this thread backwards to try to get to that point of crystallization. And yet I love that you're saying when the person themselves can really drop into the problem, the answer is already there, it sounds like.
It's there, but they may not be able to drop into it because it may never have occurred to them. So I use kinesiology, I use muscle testing, and I say, you're going to get as much information through muscle testing, which I think is just a way of, muscle testing, kinesiology.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think really what I'd say, what is that? It's asking your body to be a means of communication for soul, basically. That's what I'd say. And soul, of course, knows everything. Because, if I take our biological example, because you're a doctor, well, who are we really? We are like, I would say, if you think about our bodies, right, they're made up of about 3 trillion cells, human cells. They're made up of a lot more cells, about 3 trillion human cells. And each of them is different, right? But in the template, in the blueprint, each of them is the same. So if we identify with the surface, we're going to say we're all different. But if we identify with the template, we can create Dolly and clone Dolly from one cell. So all of the information is there if you can access the blueprint, right? So I can ask, can you find it? And if you can't find it, it's not fair to ask you because this may never have occurred to you because it may be outside of your experience when you identify with Karen. But of course, if we identify with soul, soul knows everything. Mm-hmm. And it's all happening simultaneously. So you can ask anything you want. And if you can think of the question, you'll get an answer. And then I can say, it may never have occurred to you that you're stuck in a story of betrayal, but it's useful to you because your soul is saying that you needed to know that much information to find what you needed to find. Because even if you drop in, you may get it filtered through the anxiety of I've identified with Andy or Karen, and it never would have occurred to you to say, I have to go to, my great-great-grandmother and my father's side, or I'm getting a message from the future that's a warning, but I think that's a problem. Or is my problem that I'm really reliving a trauma, or is it I'm reliving the way I protected myself to make sure it never happens again? But if you can ask those questions, you can get an answer. And so you can get amazing information about what the real problem is, and you can do a diagnostic, and you can get amazing information about where it originates, and you can get information about does something else have to happen other than that being sharing their story from the inside out while you're saying, I'm here with you. And those are the three things that I do, that if all you did was find every discomfort in your body and say, I'm just going to let it share, eventually you would get there. It's simple. I mean, it's simple to say. If you talk about the existential anxiety of non-existence, which is even worse than death, death, you die. Non-existence is like, I never existed in the first place. Well, you get to be, if you can deal with that anxiety, right, and you can recognize it, then they call you Christ or something. They call you the Buddha, or they call you Kuan Yin, or they call you something because you say, I never existed in the first place. I was just a verb. There is no I. But, good luck. That's like climbing quite a steep mountain.
Yeah, lifetimes of work to get to that.
Lifetimes of work, yeah. Well, believe me, I would say that because I've been around for lifetimes and I'm still working on it, so for sure. But if we don't believe in other lifetimes, then I haven't been around for lifetimes, but whatever.
Well, one of the things I was really interested in on your website were some of the writings that you and Dr. Swack have done and work done around loss and trauma, which I found really interesting for myself personally, because many years ago, my father died by suicide, which was a huge traumatic grief event in my own life. And similar to what you were talking about, for about 3 years after his death, all I wanted was for the pain of grief to go away. And every day, that's what I hoped for and wished for. I just want this to go away. As soon as it goes away, everything will be fine. And it finally occurred to me after 3 years that, how could I think that this doesn't have a reason to be part of my life? How could I think that it should go away? And at that point, I began to do kind of what you're describing, of just accepting the grief for what it was, allowing it to be a presence in my life. And that started an entire journey of self-exploration and learning. But so I'm really interested in this, in talking about this, in how loss affects us and shapes us, and some of the consequences of the loss that we experience, maybe in childhood or earlier in life, that never gets remembered or reintegrated into our lives.
Sure. Well, the first thing what I'd say, Judith and I were colleagues many, many years ago, but I will give, Judith her due, which is Judith, who had no psychological background at all, but was an amazing neurobiological researcher, was her background. And then she got interested in neurolinguistic programming. And out of all of that, she did her own original research on loss and violence traumas. And she said, every loss trauma has the same structure. The surface is different, but there's going to be the same structure of it over and over and over again. And you can read Judith's paper about it. And but I think what you say, she's it was a very detailed paper about saying, I can outline for you what's going to happen no matter what the loss is. If you can't handle the loss, there's going to be similar things that happen over and over and over again. And the same with violence. And she'll say, like, it's the structure of the thing. It takes on its own crystallizing structure. And you can find the same thing happening over and over and over again, although the surface of it obviously will be different depending on, I mean, like if the violence was, that you were beaten up, when you're a woman, you might say it was my fault because if I had worn my dress 6 inches lower, it would never have happened. And she said, you're going to find similar beliefs over and over and over again around any loss and any violence trauma. And I think there's a lot of truth to what she said. And I think it was really quite an extraordinary thing, particularly because she had no psychological background at all. She just did it. She's a researcher. She did bottom up, and she didn't even have any hypotheses. She just says, I'm going to just start interviewing a lot of people, and she started to see patterns. But what I would say to you is this. Grief from my point of view is the way out of hell. Because if you can let yourself grieve, you can let go of anything. If you can really let yourself grieve. The problem, of course, is we don't usually do that. So we do one of a number of other things. We get impotent rage, right? Or we get fear, or we get depression, which is just a way of not feeling anything. Or we get grudgy, or we get, which is sort of all of those things all at once, right? And what I would say is there are different ways of dealing with all of those things, but eventually what happens, if you can do it, is you say, okay, this thing happened and I have to be with the pain of it, but I don't have to feel pain about the pain of it. I can just feel the pain of it. And when you can feel the pain of it, if you can say, I can let myself really feel all of what I'm feeling, then it burns clean. It may never end, but at least it won't run your life, because you'll be stuck there, because you could say, yes, I can deal with whatever comes up. Right? Mm-hmm. And then loss is just like anything else. I mean, it's one kind of trauma. If your parent screams at you or they neglect you or whatever, I mean, if, you scream for them and they're not there, that's not a loss trauma, but that's neglect, right? And that will, and it's all the same thing in the sense there was just something that couldn't be handled. And it could be my father committed suicide and I couldn't handle that. Or it could be, my father was supposed to be there for me and he wasn't there for me. And you're going to deal with it the same way, You're going to say, because when there's a loss trauma, what you'll find is that there's a core experience around everything. And the core experience around loss, if I'm going to really get it down to a nutshell, is an inner emptiness. That there's always an emptiness that comes with loss. And the question is, can you say, I will be with that emptiness, or are you going to run away from it like it's a black hole any way you can? And really the way to grieve is to say, I'm going to bring all my attention to that emptiness, and I will sit with emptiness, which you can literally feel as a sensation. And if you could do that, you'll start to grieve because you'll be with what is, which is the emptiness. And, all of these things, everything has sort of a crystallizing inner experience. That's why there's a lot of experiences that go with loss, but at the end of the day, it's about an emptiness that goes with it. And the question is, can you sit with the emptiness? And it's literally, everything has its emptiness qualities, but for loss, unlike all of the other kinds of traumas I'm talking about, like if you're a grudge, it doesn't come out as emptiness. It's not, the core experience of it is not, I feel empty. That is the core experience of a loss trauma. And then the question is, what does it take for me to be able to say, instead of doing everything I can not to be pulled into that emptiness, I'm going to do something totally counterintuitive and say, I will say yes to you without reacting to you.
That's so interesting to me, because during that time when I was struggling with the grief, I used to have a lot of dreams about falling in various ways, which to me is what you were talking about, allowing myself to go into the emptiness. But I would always resist it and make myself wake up.
Right.
I'd fall off a chairlift or I'd fall into a hole in the street, but I would always make myself wake up before I actually fell. I knew what was coming and I would wake up. And one day I realized, like, maybe that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to have the dream. I need to let myself see what happens when I actually fall.
Yeah. Well, that was very wise, because then you say, okay, dream, you know more than I do, and I'm going to let you teach me. And you're telling me the same thing over and over and over again. But, you know, it was too difficult for me to like really attune to what you were telling me. But now I'm going to listen, because you're wiser than I am. So I have great admiration for you.
And do you find that sometimes we have to grow up, we have to get older and gain more tools, and one of the reasons we can't handle what has happened to us is simply because we're young and we haven't grown fully yet, and that maybe we can handle it later in life?
I would say two things. There's two things you always have to take into account. One is trauma and one is development, right? There's certain things, I mean, who knows? I mean, you know, maybe if you were born Christ, you could handle certain things when you were very, very young. But most of us, most of the time, we have to cut to certain stages of development. And if something happens, it's too much for us to handle because we're 3 years old, and essentially no 3-year-old is going to be able to handle it. You have to live more. But you also have to have the tool, which is to say, you know, if you have some kind of horrendous thing that happens to you, right, when you're 3 years old, at least if I could say, you could at least begin to sit with it as opposed to thinking it's who you are, right? So we could begin to let you touch into it a little bit as you're ready to do it. We may be able to save you an awful lot of time and heartache. Because if I could say to you when your father commits suicide, for example, I could say to you, why don't we at least start the process and notice what you're experiencing in the body, and then choose to bring your attention there. And then at the very least, you won't identify with it quite so much. Or notice what's happening in the body and say, it's just something I'm experiencing. And in that way, I can witness it, so I can bring it outside me and see that it's one more experience. If we taught our kids how to do that, which would be, from my point of view, like the best thing they could ever learn in school, other than the Enneagram, which is a different subject. But if we could teach every one of our kids to say, you're having that experience, but don't identify with it. Don't deny it, but like, let's really see what happens when you say, oh my God, or in your case, oh my father committed suicide and I can't handle it. So what would happen if you say, what happens in your body when you say, he committed suicide and I can't handle it? And you'll have a sensation. And then at least you could be with the you that's having that experience, as opposed to saying, I am that me, because then you're cooked. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so I would say yes, and. Because there are things developmentally that we just can't, virtually none of us can handle, because we just don't have the resources yet, no matter what. And so it's a both and proposition for me.
Yeah. I once read a study that said about 50% of people that were surveyed in a mental health center waiting room, it turned out had hidden grief experiences in the past that had never been dealt with. And I was wondering if that would ring true for the clients that you work with, if a lot of them have old grief and loss trauma that's just never been addressed.
I would say way more. I would say all of us have.
Yeah.
I would not say the 50% that said they don't have it. They just didn't like think about, because look at it this way. Take any trauma you've got. Okay, you scream for your parents when you're a little baby and they don't come, right? Because the world's supposed to revolve around you, and you have every expectation they're going to come, and they don't. So you say, all right, I'm going to hold my breath, or I'm going to throw things, or I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to say, like, you know, I'm never going to let myself feel again. Well, what's underneath all of it? It's grief. They didn't come, right? Grief. Or, you know, somebody takes your basketball when you want to go and play with them, and they violate your values, and you say, all right, I'm going to go home, and like, I'll make sure that never happens again. And then you stay in your house for the rest of your life. Well, what's underneath it? Grief. I would say grief is the way out of everything. If you can say, I can let myself experience the thing and experience the fact that there was something here that, I have to mourn, and it's everything. And that's because once you can say, I can be with it, then you can say, I can grieve what didn't happen or what did happen that shouldn't have happened or whatever it is. And that's just being with the part of you that says, I can be with you and be with whatever you're experiencing. And we'll start with your anger, or we'll start with your impotent rage, but underneath it all, or we'll start with your sadness, because we may have to start with, some people won't let themselves feel anger. So we'll start with your sadness, when we'll get to your anger, and then we'll get to your terror, and then we'll get to your grief. People say, they get angry not to feel sad. There's some people who feel sad not to feel angry. But the question is, can you be with whatever's there and say, I can sit with it plus what didn't happen that ought to have happened, but that's the way things are. Can I grieve it, and then can it burn clean? Because once you can grieve it, then you can say, I can feel pain about it, but I'm not going to be judgmental about it. And then and then you start to find things, like you start to say, maybe, because we have to hold ourselves in two ways. One is, your father committed suicide, you come in, all I'm going to be able to say to you in the beginning is that I am so sorry that happened to you. And we can sit with whatever is coming up for you. And then at some point or other, maybe you're going to find out that on some level, there was something you gained from that you couldn't have gained any other way. And that's the really tricky thing, to be able to hold the person in their humanness and hold them in their soul, because on the soul level, the only question ever is, how is it serving? But of course, if I said that to you when you walked into the room, you'd have every reason to say, are you crazy? So we have to be able to hold both those things, and grief is what allows that to happen from my point of view.
Yeah.
So I think.
Wow, that's really beautiful, because ultimately, of course, that's the point I got to within myself about my own grief, is to see how it was serving and how it changed my life and changed the course of my life, and has been amazing, the things that I've learned and the ways I've grown. But I was thinking about, right now, there are a number of different grief recovery methods and processes out there, but really it sounds to me like the key reason that they work and help people is simply because they help people be present with what is. They just help them sit with it and acknowledge it. And whatever way you do that, it is likely to be helpful.
The one thing I'd say is, the one thing we all can do, which I really like it. I mean, I think the body, it's like, if you can say, I think the body is like a record of everything that has ever happened, is happening, and could ever potentially happen. So it's like, you don't have to go and search, because it's all here right now. It's like, it's a record. So I find it an unbelievably simple, powerful way to say, if I can sit with the experience by finding the discomfort in the body and saying, I'll be with you, you're going to be with the person who couldn't handle the suicide. You're going to be with the person who betrayed the trust. You're going to be with the person who was neglected. I think all of it is self-acceptance, everything. Can you accept all of who you are and just say, I can be here with you? You say, how do you deal with your fear of death? As soon as you know that you can't die on that level. But in order to know that, first you have to deal with your fear that you will, and then you have to deal with something even worse, which is there's two different fears that we're talking about. One is the fear of death. One is the fear of non-existence, which is a much deeper fear. Mm-hmm. And if you can deal with your fear of non-existence, then you can be who you are, because then you can become everything. But of course, you'll never let yourself do that if you identify with anything, because as soon as you become who you are, which is everything, any particular thing just dissolves and non-exists. But
so it's the soul level that perceives that this physical existence isn't real anyway, or that can let go of it, and it doesn't cling and isn't attached to a physical existence anyway.
Right. And I'd say freedom is when we realize that's who we are, and the other one is just like something we've identified with, but it's not really who we are. And then that's real freedom from my point of view, because then You're just playing out what you're supposed to play out so that life can evolve. That's why we call it life-centered therapy. Life is trying to evolve through our experiences. And the more we can do our experiences, I mean, if you think about it this way, right? If you're everything, there's one thing you can't be, right? You can't have relationship. So if you want to think about the divine or life, right? It's infinite, but it's limited. Because if you're everything, you can't eat an apple, so to speak. So how is life, life, we yearn to become who we truly are, which is unity. But life, I think, longs for love. And, the beautiful thing, I mean, what Matthew says, and, I'm not very religious, but what Matthew says, when two or more are gathered, there is love. If you're the only thing that's there, you can be all powerful, you can be all knowing, but you can't be all loving because there's nothing to love. So you have to create something to love, but you have to get them to forget who they are, because if they remember they were everything, you'd just be loving yourself and you're totally narcissistic. So all we're trying to do, I think, is help life evolve by saying we can have relationship and we can really be there. And then life goes from being infinite and limited to infinite and unlimited. That's why I call it life-centered therapy, because I think life is trying to evolve through us by creating more love. And we're trying to evolve by realizing who we truly are, which is unity, And when we realize we're unity, then life will sort of say, now I can know what it means to be not just all knowing, which is the mind, right? Omniscient, or omnipotent, which is all powerful, which is the belly. But there is no word. There's no equivalent word for all loving. And I think, there have been words people have tried, but it just doesn't have the same. Two of the centers it's got, but you can't be all loving until there's something to love. That's what I think anyway.
I like that. I like that a lot. And also the idea that life is trying to evolve through us, which in my mind, that really helps me make sense of everything that's happened in my life when I can view it that way. I'm a participant here. I'm doing something really good for life just by living, being in this body and living and being with whatever happens and whatever comes my way.
That's if you can simultaneously hold, the everything and the no thing and the something, right? That each of us is everything. We're in relationship with everything. It's like cells and bodies. Every cell is in relationship to the body, and it has its role to play, right? Mm-hmm. And every cell is in relationship with every other cell, and every cell is everything. That's called the Trinity, I think, actually.
That's really beautiful. It makes me wish that I had known you so many years ago. I came to so much spiritual growth and so much spiritual wisdom just through the process of dealing with that grief. And so I really did see how that suffering could be a teacher and could lead me on this journey that I needed to follow in order to learn things. And maybe it's good there wasn't a shortcut, or took me a lifetime to get here, but
I don't know. It sounds like you didn't need me. And when your father committed suicide, I may not have known all this stuff anyway. So, but the beauty is why it's also, we call it originally guided self-healing. And that's what we call it for the people who do our trainings who don't want to be practitioners. Because really if you came in and you were here, I would say, I don't know the answers for you, but I can at least point you in a direction, which is the one you found anyway. And life will also tell me whether I should point you in the direction or say, I don't know. Because sometimes it really helps to give somebody a little nudge to say, it's going to be really useful to you if you can sit with the experience of the grief. And sometimes it says, let them discover it for themselves. And the least I can do is say, I'm not going to be the one who's the expert. Your soul is the expert, but at least I can ask the question, because I can say, is it going to be useful for your evolution for you to find it yourself, right? Because maybe you've depended on people too much or whatever it is? Or is it going to be useful for your evolution to say, I'm going to receive a gift from you that will give me some answer to something? And I never know, but at least I know I don't know, but I know some aspect of your being knows what's best used for you if I can think of the question to ask and be non-attached to the answer.
Yeah. Well, I'm really interested in the training that you offer for people who want to be a facilitator or teacher for life-centered therapy. And I also wanted to ask you, because this is end of life university, a lot of my listeners are people who work in the death and dying field. So they work with terminally ill patients. And it seems to me that life-centered therapy could be really helpful for some patients who, as they're facing the end of life, they're trying to figure out, what was this all about? What am I doing here? And how do I put it together and tie up all the loose ends of life? And so I don't know if you've ever worked with dying patients or if you have a sense that this therapy would be really helpful.
Well, I'm biased, you have to know, but I think it's been unbelievably useful. I mean, and like I say to people, I won't give you a guarantee about what's going to happen. People come to me with, they say they have terminal cancer. They say, can you cure me? I say, I'm not into cure. I'm into healing. If life, provides a cure for you, well, then that's fine. But it's not going to be me. But you never know what's going to happen. I'm not going to say that miracles don't happen, but I'm not going to say I'm, some people say, oh, can't you cure cancer? I said, no, I don't know how to cure. I'm not God. I don't know how to cure cancer. But I can guarantee you, if you sit with what's there, something will come to you about what lessons that life is revealing to you that you're learning that will make you'll be in a whole different relationship with it. And, that's a miracle. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I've worked with a lot of people who, are dying and they die, but, they may not be as anxious, or they might say, oh my God, something has been revealed to me that I feel more alive even in the moment I'm getting close to dying. So I'd say that's a miracle, so yes. And the training, if you want to find out about the training, we have, you can find you just go, the way to find out the training is that we have a website. It's called go.readyforamiracle.net/free training. Free-training. It's go.readyforamiracle.net/free-training. And that's where you find out all about our trainings. And the beauty of the training is that the online training we do, you get an incredible amount of mentoring. We give you the whole framework and all the protocols, and the protocols are intuitive. I'm very big picture. Thankfully, around me, I have some people who are relatively able to be a little bit more linear than I am. I can do linear, but it's not my preferred way of being. But yeah, someone like you, I'd be feeling like I was living and going to heaven if I ever had you in a training. But the beauty is, you get in this training, just if you did the very beginning of it, you get 26 hours of mentoring with people who are going through the thing with you. And sort of I'm just there as a resource. I mean, when I'm doing my writing retreats, one of my colleagues is there for you as a resource, but it's mainly me. And, you can ask anything you want. You can share anything you want. You can talk about your practicing. When you practice it, you can talk about any questions you have. If you're stuck someplace, I'll even do some work with you in the context of you being a guide, right? Because as you say, sometimes we get stuck. Basically, when you get stuck is when you bring your attention to yourself. Mm-hmm. That's it, right? All life asks us to do is say, I'm just here with you. But if you start to say, I'm not sure I'm doing it right, well, where's your attention? You're not there with the person. So you better hope they're there with themselves, because you won't be, because you'll be gone. So if something comes up where, you have some kind of anxiety, then I'll work with you even with that. The only thing I don't do in those mentoring things is do sessions like you're, wanting me to guide you as a client, so to speak. If you want that, you have to go as a client. And it's just, as I said, it's go.readyforamiracle.net/free-training. And that's where you find about our training. If you want to know all about what we do, it's LifeCenteredTherapy.com. And if you want to write me, which you can find there, I'll answer any questions. It's Hahn, like Andy Hahn, or Andy, but I go by Andy. Hahn at LifeCenteredTherapy.com. And I promise, if you write me, I will write you back. If you ask me a question, I will answer your question. And, because I do. So, and sure, I mean, like, and end of life. Oh my goodness. I'll tell you why. Because there's two different things that happen at the end of life. One of which is you have to deal with your fear of death and all of what happens there. The other of which is often the things that you're most afraid of, like about just who you are, right, really can come up as a way to try to hold on to control, right? So, you could be dying, but if you're someone who's a giver, you can say, I'm not going to let anyone take care of me. I'm going to take care of them. And it's very hard for you to receive the gift of saying, I need you. But if you could be with your sense of unworthiness, if you're not taking care of other people, if you're a giver, for example, and you could be with that fear that if you didn't take care of them even while you were dying and you couldn't do anything, and you could sit with your fear about yourself that I'm unworthy if I'm not taking care of you, then maybe you could receive something and let them give you a gift of something, which would be giving them a gift. So you'd really be giving them what they needed, which was to be able to say, let me care for you. Or if you have something where you're afraid of your own impotence, you always have to be the one who's in control and powerful. And you could sit with, there's nothing I can do about this. I'm powerless. If you could sit with your fear about powerlessness, then you'd be free. So not only do you get to deal with the fear of death, but you get to deal with things people are even more afraid of sometimes, which is the thing that they're most afraid to experience about themselves. And that is really useful for people when they're, in that kind of process,
Yeah, really powerful. So I would think a lot of end of life workers who might be interested in this area would benefit from getting a little bit more training in how to go to these places and how to be present with patients and how to help them accept what is in their life.
You and I are so on the same page. We might as well be writing it together. And I know you know about it too. And I don't know if you train them, but you obviously have unbelievable compassion and wisdom about this also, Karen. So I don't know if you train people, but if you don't, you probably ought to.
Well, thank you. Well, Andy, I want to thank you for talking with me today. The hour we had together just flew by, and I really appreciate learning from you. And I hope we have a chance to talk again sometime.
You invite me, I'll talk about, as you might tell, I like to talk. I also like to listen, but I do like to talk. I'll come back. You want me, I'll come back if you want. And we can talk about anything, or I can do a demonstration of the work with you, because I do the work remotely with people. So,
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's really amazing, to experience a session. I can do it if you want. I can do it with you, or I can do it with anybody you want me to do it with. I can show you, or we could talk about, all the other things we were talking about at the end here, because that is a really valuable thing. There are things that most people would say, I'd rather be dead than have to admit that, I'm unworthy, or that I'm a failure, or that I'm a nobody, or, I'm insufficient. So if you can face the things you're most afraid to experience about yourself, it actually makes dying a whole heck of a lot easier.
Mm.
And then if you can deal with your fear of death and your fear of non-existence, you can do all those things. People who are dying can actually be more alive than when they were alive.
Yeah, that's very true.
Thing.
Yeah, I've witnessed it. I've seen it. Yeah, well, it's amazing.
Yeah. So, I'll come back anytime. It would be a total joy. Being with you has been, you say that I was gone past 5 for you. For me too, it's like, oh my God. It's like, this is called living and going to heaven. You don't have to die to go to heaven. You can live.
Well, thanks again. And we will stay in touch.
Yeah, well, I would love that. And we will.
All right.
If we want to make it happen, we can make that happen. That is in our control.
That's very true.
That's very true. So thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Andrew Hahn. I found it fascinating to think about and consider some of the topics he brought up, particularly the idea that our trauma and grief are expressed in the physical body. And so by paying attention to the physical symptoms we're experiencing, we can tap into the emotional and spiritual pain that is occurring at the same time. So I really like that idea. And I think that's sometimes something we fail to look at. in ourselves and when we're working with other people, and the fact that that trauma can be our own personal trauma that is happening in our own lifetimes, but could also be ancestral trauma from the past, or even trauma from a previous lifetime, if you happen to believe that that's possible. So I think his methodology could be really helpful, and also his advice that we simply need to be with the pain. And I liked his statement that we need to experience the actual pain of grief rather than turn away from that and experience pain about the pain. And I see that happening so often, even in my own life, how many times I'm avoiding the real issue and I'm dealing with the pain that I'm experiencing because of the avoidance that I'm practicing. So this information has been helpful to me. I hope that you find it helpful as well. And I remind you to be sure to share this podcast with other people. If you enjoy the content and you know someone else who might like to listen in, please tell them about it, let them know how to subscribe, or send them an episode or two that you think could be helpful to them. It also makes a big difference if you subscribe on the platform wherever you happen to be listening and leave a rating and a review for the podcast. That means it will be shown to more people who are searching online for this kind of information, and just helps us grow this community of people who care about end-of-life issues. So until next week, remember, we're here for love. So face your fear and your pain. Be ready for whatever life brings you next, and love each and every moment of this amazing life. Bye-bye.